Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for today's webinar, Event Administration and Configuration. So we can go ahead and get started, but before we do, we will go through just a little bit of housekeeping. And speaking of which, all of your phones and microphones should be muted. So if you do have questions throughout today's webinar, you can ask them right in the chat. You don't have to wait until the end, and you'll get answers right away from one of my favorite teammates, Devin. Devin is hanging out in the chat, and he'll answer all of your event administration and configuration questions. So, in addition to today's content, you can find a list of all of our upcoming webinars on our calendar. If you go to clubexpress.com/calendar, you can see all of the upcoming webinars. For the rest of the year, we just have one more, which is the companion webinar to today's webinar. So, in today's webinar, we are going to be talking about just the event calendar. We're going to be going through configuration setup, and we're going to talk about all of the administrative functions that you'll have access to within the calendar. Now, next week, Devin is going to be talking to us about what you can do with active events, managing active events, tracking attendance, managing registrations, updating registrations, different reports that you might run while the event is still active, or perhaps maybe when the event is concluded. So keep an eye out for that. And in addition to the webinars that we host in the future, you can find all of our previously hosted webinars and our tutorials on our YouTube channel. If you search for clubexpress.com with the .com spelled out in YouTube, you can find our YouTube channel, watch all of our great tutorials and webinars there. And while you're there, if you want to hit that subscribe button, it doesn't just boost our number of subscribers, which doesn't really mean very much, but what it does for you is it gives you a notification every time we upload a new webinar or tutorial, so you can stay up to date even if you miss our twice or three times monthly webinars. Now, in addition to our videos, another thing that we might ask of you is to leave us a review. So if you're currently using ClubExpress and you have some thoughts, we would love to hear those. Your review of your experience with ClubExpress, whether it's with our customer service or whether it's with just your website in general, it really helps other potential customers determine if ClubExpress is a good fit for them. So if you have a moment, go to clubexpress.com/reviews and leave us a review on any one of the sites that you see there. And our last sort of commercial before we dive into our topic, many of you may have seen an email announcing our next learning event, Design Drills. So if you haven't seen the email, take a minute to go to clubexpress.com/design drills or visit the support tab of your control panel. So Design Drills is a 5-week course that we are hosting starting at the beginning of the year. Our first day is January 12th. You can find a list of all of the dates of the courses as well as what each session includes. So we are going to be hosting a 5-week course to show you how to use not just our built-in out-of-the-box tools, but how to add in maybe a little bit of spice to your website. We're not just going to be going through the template builder and the page builder. We, of course, will go through those. We're also going to be going through some advanced techniques, including some CSS, HTML. We're going to be going through things with you step by step so that you can create one of those really great looking websites that you tend to see, maybe some other people have who might have a little more design experience than you. So to get a better idea of the individual sessions that are going to be offered, make sure you check out that information either in the control panel of your website or by visiting clubexpress.com. You can also click on the bootcamp banner that you normally would see at the very top of our homepage. And just so you know, the course is currently running at a discount. So if you purchase it before December 15th, you'll save a good chunk of change. And that price is going to be $99 through December 15th. After December 15th, the course price goes back up to $129, but of course you can still purchase it. And again, those courses start on January 12th. So go to clubexpress.com/design drills to learn more. And without further ado, Let's go ahead and get started. So today, like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the event calendar and administration and configuration. We're going to talk about everything that you could do, not just to set up the calendar so that it works best for you and for your organization, but what can you do while you're handling events? So we're going to talk about ways that you can categorize your events for easier searching, how to create copies of events. So if you aren't familiar with the copy feature, it's going to be a huge time saver for you. Deleting, archiving, and canceling events. So ways that you can remove events from your calendar just because they're up there doesn't mean that they're stuck up there. And if you aren't already asking registrants questions, we can show you how to do that within the event itself. Not just asking them questions, but what if you're asking them questions that you may have already asked them before? We'll go through that too. And a new feature that we just launched recently is the ability to pair attachments with a member's registration. So if you have an event where you need to see that someone's uploaded a license or a certificate or anything like that, we have a new feature which allows you to pair an attachment type that you may have set up within your People tab for your members and pair that again with events that you have on your calendar. And another plug, make sure to tune in next week for our companion webinar that's going to go through managing active events. So the first thing that I want to do is talk about what we're going to cover. The first thing that we're going to talk about is just basic setup for the module. Then we're going to go into configuring the calendar and talk about the different views that we have. We're also going to be searching through events. We're going to be editing and copying events. So we're going to spend a ton of time on really a couple of different screens within the event calendar. So let me go ahead and switch gears here. So I am on our demo site and I'm going to sign in as Martin Smith. Martin Smith is our trustee administrator for the Northwest Balloon Club. And like I said, we're going to visit our control panel and your event calendar is going to be inside your website tab under website modules. So like with all of our modules, you have the ability to configure a handful of items with the module. So on the right-hand side of my control panel, I can click the configure icon, and that'll give me access to configure various options within the website tab. And each time you switch tabs, that configure button is going to contain the information for the tab that you're in. So I can select my event calendar. Right off the bat, if it's not active for you, you can activate the module right from this screen. I can also rename the module. Now, the function name is just events, and that's what I see on the back end of my control panel. That's what your administrators are going to see. But when it's on my menu, I just have it listed as calendar. And then finally, my browser title, which is the title that would appear at the top left-hand corner of my browser tab, is the same as my function name. I can change those if I'd like to. And another thing that we can talk about is coordinators, which you may already be familiar with. But in the case of events, there are a couple of different layers of coordinators or access that you can grant to events. Like with every module, when you assign a coordinator at the control panel level, you are giving that person access to everything within that module. So assigning a coordinator at this stage would mean that Jimmy, we'll go ahead and select Jimmy, is going to be the coordinator for this particular module. He'll have access to every single event. And in this case, our club, and this is going to touch on one of the things that we're going to talk about towards the end of our session today. In this case, our Northwest Balloon Club has chapters. Now, if your organization does not have chapters and you are a one and done club, you can ignore this. This field will not appear for you. But for organizations who have chapters, you will see an entire drop-down list of all of the chapters and districts and regions within your organization. So I can say that Jimmy should be a coordinator for all events at a global scale. So from the parent all the way down. Or I can say, well, Jimmy is actually not managing very many of those events, and Jimmy is actually more localized. He's in the Northwest suburbs, so Jimmy only needs to manage those local events. I can get really down into the grains with this. So I'm going to keep that the way it is and make sure that Jimmy only has access to events for that specific chapter. I'll go ahead and save that. And now, not only can I see that Jimmy's a coordinator, but I can see the level that he's a coordinator up to. And I'll go ahead and close this out. So once we've added a handful of people that we might want to be aiding our event setup, we'll go right into events. And we'll start working within our events manager. Now, most of the time that we're going to be spending in the module today is going to be based on this screen. This is going to be your sort of home screen for the back end of your event calendar. Like many of our modules and databases, you'll see that really familiar search field up at the top of your screen here. So within our search parameters, I can search by start or finish date. If I just select search right now, which is typically what we do when we are working through tutorials or webinars, we take the defaults as they are. And usually the defaults are pretty intuitive. In this case, we're looking for all event types, so single, multiple activity events, notifications that you may have added to your calendar, and quick events. We're only looking for 3 statuses, however. We're looking for any events that are in the process of being created, events that are pending approval, so events that may have been added to the calendar, quick events that are pending approval, and any active events. By default, we aren't looking at any quick events that may have been declined. So if you are allowing members to add quick events to your calendar, and we'll show you where you might make that change. If you're allowing members to add those quick events to your calendar and you decline those, we're not looking at those by default. We're not looking at canceled events, and we're also not looking at archived events. So if you need to search for a canceled event, maybe you want to just double check what maybe the event included or who may have registered for it, you'll have to go into event status to actually change those. The next field, again, if your organization does not have chapters, that field will not display for you. However, in the case of the Northwest Balloon Club has additional chapters that are associated with it. So I can filter my event search by a specific chapter. I can filter it by a specific region. I can also filter my events by state or metro area if you have metro areas that are set up within your organization. By title, which of course is just the title of the event, and by category. And then I can also change my sort order. I'm going to go ahead and select search without adjusting any of the search criteria. And again, this is an administrative search. So this is the back end of your event calendar. Searching for members looks slightly different. Now, with all of my events, they're being sorted by most recent. So all of my future dates are right at the top here. Anything that really hasn't happened yet is starting right about here. We're at the beginning of December, and all of these additional items are items that happened in the past. Now, right off the bat, you might be thinking, well, this is just a lot of stuff that I don't want to see, especially if it's already happened. I just want to see the events that are coming up. I don't want to see anything that's already happened. That's where archiving is going to come into play. Notice that on the right-hand side, we're going to take a brief detour to talk about some of the statuses that you might see. On the right-hand side, you'll see that some of our events will have a small box icon that allows you to archive them. Not every single event has that. So in the case where events have the option to archive it, you can archive the event by selecting that box icon, categorize the event, and it'll be removed from your screen. And we'll talk about archiving in just a moment. Now, at the very top, we can see our start date. So this is going to be the start date for all of your events. If you're hosting an event that spans more than one day, it's going to go based off of that first date that you enter, the title of the event, and the status. Now, I mentioned that there are several different statuses that you might see here. we're looking at just 3, and it looks like we really only are seeing some active status events here. A creating status is applied to an event where you may have actually started configuring the event, but you never checked the panel is complete box on the basic info screen. So when you don't check that box, it still says that the event is being created. A pending approval event, of course, is when you have a member who's created a quick event and it requires approval. Declined, of course, is when you've declined the event. An active event is one that you've either approved or created and is currently live on your website. So most of the events that you're going to see here are active. A canceled event. A canceled event is when you as an administrator physically cancel the event. You press that cancel button. We'll show you how to find that button in just a moment. And an archived event, when you've actually gone through the process of archiving an event. And we'll talk about the difference between canceling and archiving and deleting an event in just a second. Next up, we have our category. We can quickly see the number of registrations and registrants. So those are both slightly different. The number of registrations versus the number of registrants. You may have multiple registrants in one registration. So if I register myself, my partner, and maybe a couple of friends, there are 4 registrants, but there's only 1 registration because I've included everyone in mine. And next up, we have the wait list. So you have the wait list cap and how many folks have signed up for your wait list if you have the wait list activated. So you'll see that many of these don't have a wait list, so we just put NA in there. The level of event. So if you have events that are at the club level or the top level, parent level of your organization, which it looks like most of these are, and we do have some events that are being hosted at a more local level. Again, if your organization does not have any chapters, you're not going to see that level designation. And finally, the type. So with our type, we're looking at all types of events in these search results, and it looks like most of what we're seeing would be a single activity, a multiple activity event, or a quick event. And then on the right-hand side is our maintain column. Now, before we take a look at the maintain column, let's take another look at just what's left on this screen that we haven't quite gone through, because our first stop is going to be setting up some of our basic configuration items. So I'm going to skip over archiving and deleting en masse, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And I'm going to start off with our event categories. So when I select event categories, I'm taken to my category administration screen. And as you know, we at ClubExpress love categories. These categories are categories that are going to be helpful for you as administrators and for your members and even non-members. These categories are entirely searchable by anyone who visits your site. So make sure that they make sense not just to you, but to your members as well. With each category, I have the ability to designate a specific color. I can name it, of course. I can say whether or not I want members to be able to use it for quick events if they are adding their own quick events to the calendar. I can also limit my registrations per category per member. So if you have a set of classes that you host on an annual basis, maybe you host 1 class a month, but you want to limit that to, let's say, members can only go to to 4 of those classes. You don't want everyone to be able to go to all of them. Maybe there's very limited seating and you want everyone to be able to benefit to attend those. So if I see that I'd like to limit my registrations, let's say I've set up a category for different courses that I want, I can say, well, for a calendar year. So for a calendar year from January to December, the maximum number of registrations per member would be, let's say, 4. Now, this does not apply to non-members. The reason being is that non-members wouldn't necessarily log in or find themselves in your database in order to sign up for an event. Obviously, non-members do not have their own login, but if you are familiar enough with the system, you know that even a non-member has the ability to search through your database to find themselves. They can search by their own email address so that they're not creating a second record and everything is being applied to the same record. Not every non-member does that, so we don't have the ability to keep track of that. Now, underneath that, here's our new feature. So we have the ability now to link member attachments to a specific category of event. So on this end, all I'm doing as an administrator is saying, okay, I've set up this category. Let's say my category is for that once a month class that I'm hosting as a club or association. And perhaps I want to see maybe a certificate from a previous course. Maybe I want to see a certificate from a course that's been taken outside of my organization, or a license. I can find all of the applicable attachments that I want to apply to this category from the list of attachments that I've created as an administrator in member attachments. Now, adding those attachments to member attachments, that's a whole other thing. We have video tutorials that go through how you create those attachment types and what your members are able to do with them. In this case, all I'm saying is, as an administrator, if I'm looking at registrations for an event that falls in this category, what attachments do I want to quickly be able to see for every member who's registered? So I can go ahead and select those and save my changes. And next week, when you come back to take a look at what we can do with active events, we're going to go through and see what that registration process looks like and what that looks like for an administrator once you have those attachments associated with registrations. How are you able to access them? And what happens if a member doesn't have that attachment associated with their profile? So keep in mind that with our event categories, there are a couple of basic things to remember. The first is that your members and non-members can use these categories to search through your calendar as well. So make sure that they are obvious and descriptive. The next is that you have the ability to link a member attachment to a category, and that, of course, that you can limit member attendance to events by category and by a specific time of year. Now let's pop back into our events manager and take a look at the next couple of items that we can configure on the back end. So we've set up our categories. We know how we're going to categorize these events. I want to talk very quickly about registrant types just because it is listed on the menu, but it's something that most clubs or associations won't be using. Registrant types is a legacy option that a lot of clubs or associations that have been with ClubExpress for a very long time might still be using. However, it's not something that you'll be able to set up, so you can just ignore that option. Event questions. Event questions are really a bank of questions that you are using to pull from to sprinkle into all of the events that you create. So when you're creating an event, you don't have to create the same questions every single time you add a new event to your calendar. Maybe you're constantly asking about food options or food allergies. Maybe you always want to ask for a phone number. You always want to ask if it's someone's first meeting. Maybe you always want to ask these questions. You can pull them from a bank of questions. Every time you ask it, those answers are stored with the event. They are not stored with the question. So when you're taking a look at all of these event questions, I can go ahead and add a question, or I can take a look at how an additional question was configured when I set it up. You'll see that I have my question name. That's an admin name only. And if you are familiar with questions and how those are set up, great. If not, we, of course, have plenty of tutorials and webinars to cover all of our question options. Whenever you see questions that you can create on your site, they're always going to follow the same rules. On the left-hand side, we have our question name, the answer type we've chosen, whether or not the answer would be required if it's presented to a registrant, and what the question is linked to. So that's interesting. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Let's take a look at our languages question, select that edit option, and see how this was set up and what exactly it means to have a question linked to something. Now, right at the top, I have this notation that the question is linked to additional data languages. So what this means is that I've added in a question here that is directly linked to an additional member data question that I've already created. So that helps me out in a couple of ways. One,
I don't have to recreate the question here. And 2, any answer that was already filled in as part of a member signing up or renewing gets pre-filled and added to the registration. So if I cancel out of here and I go ahead and add a question from scratch, at the very top, here's that link question option, except now I have my drop-down menu. I can choose to link this to a number of fields in our basic contact information. I can also link it to any additional member data question that I've already created. So again, what this does is it pulls information that's previously been entered. So no one has to enter in the same information twice. If you want to throw a bunch of webinars or lunch and learns on your calendar, ask the same question in every single one of them, what languages do you speak? You can pull that information again from registration reports. You don't have to go back into any member profile to see, okay, who speaks Spanish, because we need a Spanish translator. You can quickly run a report from events to see what those answers were without having to double back to the member profile to see what they filled in. Now, like I mentioned, your event questions are just a bank of questions. So a lot of times what will happen is that, and this happens to me too, I go in and I add an event and I get to the question part. I'm really excited and I've prepared all of my things. And then I get to the question portion and I have forgotten to add my questions. That's fine. You can go back in and edit any one of these events as many times as you need to. And just because the question wasn't there when you added the event in the first place doesn't mean you can't add it after the fact. So just remember that all of those questions are going to be in configure event questions. And remember that they're outside of the event because these questions can be used for any event that you create. They're not specific to the event, but their answers will be. So aside from event questions, another great option for you would be your locations. Now, within your locations, you'll see here that doesn't just say event locations, it says event and volunteering locations. That's because your event calendar and your volunteering module are kind of connected on the back end. If you use the volunteering module, you know that you have the ability to link volunteering opportunities to your event calendar, specifically to an event that you've added. So a lot of those might share the same locations, which is why when you add a frequently used location to your list, it'll appear in both modules. You'll see here that this form is really, really similar to the one that you might see when you're actually configuring the location within your event. It's the same exact thing. And what this does is it creates a drop-down list for you. So if you have the same number of events or the same events at the same locations all the time, save yourself the time and add those locations here. As you know, it doesn't prevent you from adding a new location as a one-off in the event. All it does is saves you a few extra clicks. Now, back in our events manager, so I skipped over a couple of items. So we're going to round out our email reminders and our defaults, and then we're going to talk about some of the additional things that we can do on the events manager. So let's talk about email reminders. Now, email reminders, we have been talking a lot about emails recently. We've made some updates to our system emails. We have been talking about creating blast emails. Your event email reminders. Now, these are not the only system emails that are associated with the event calendar. These are just the reminders that you might want to quickly make changes to. Now, remember that these system emails apply to every single event. They are not event specific, but as you'll see when you open any system email, there are tags within the email that specify what event that particular email is for. So any changes that you make to these system emails, to any system email, especially the ones for events, make sure that they are general. Make sure that you're not going in and creating essentially a personalized email for each and every event that you might have. So again, each of these can be found here. Go to the system emails section of your control panel to find more emails that you might want to edit for your event calendar. We, of course, have plenty of webinars and tutorials to talk about how to edit those system emails. We did just host a recent webinar on system emails, so all of that content is fresh. And if you're wondering, well, why aren't we going through all of this during this particular webinar? It would take hours. So we try to condense everything and point you to where else you can find that information and where you can get more detailed information. The event calendar has a lot of components, and we could spend days on this. So we try to make sure that we point you to things that'll save us time so that we can focus on other content. Now, the last thing that we'll take a look at would be our event defaults. Now, our event defaults are what I like to really call time savers. Just because you select something as a default, and this is true in many spaces on your site, doesn't mean that it's going to be that way forever. First of all, you can always change your default settings. And second of all, most of the time you can adjust the default settings when you're actually setting up the item, whether it's an event or anything else. So keep that in mind. Now, at the very top, we have my favorite time saver, which is what pages don't you ever use? If you are never going to ask any of your registrants questions, even though we have that wonderful question bank and you can link it to other questions in the profile, maybe it's just a little much for you. You don't really need that much information. You just want to know how many people are going to show up. Go ahead and unclick that. Doesn't need to show up. And if you decide that maybe 3 years from now, you want to ask some questions, you can go ahead and add that back in at any point in time, even when you're configuring the event. So take a look at which items you never use and probably aren't going to use very often and remove those from the list. It's really nice to not have to see extra things that you're never going to touch. Keeps the screen looking clean and it keeps it looking simplified. This is especially helpful if you are getting to the point where you might be passing off your duties as they relate to the event calendar to someone else in your organization, especially if they haven't worked with ClubExpress before. As we all know, there are a lot of options and a lot of customizations that help us, create an event that works for a lot of clubs or create an event calendar that works for a lot of clubs, not just a few clubs. So that can mean that some of the clubs will find the number of options a little bit overwhelming. So if there are some things that you can sort of remove from that process, not just to make it simpler on yourself, but going forward to make that adjustment a little bit easier for people who might be resuming your duties or helping out on the back end. Next up, you can configure default policies. When you're creating an event, one of the last pages that you'll visit is your cancellation policy and your release agreement. So your release agreement is going to be something that your members might be required to sign when they're signing up for an event with you. You can create a default release agreement that you can apply to every event. Same with your cancellation policy. And again, you can still create a one-off agreement for specific events. One of the questions that you're asked is, do you want to use your default release agreement or do you want to create a new one? So again, these are time savers. Next up, and I won't spend a ton of time on this, this is just how you want the calendar to display and what you want it to look like for not just members, but also administrators. We talked a little bit about members creating quick events. So we do have tutorials available on how to actually add a quick event, what they are, how they're different from a full event. But if you are interested in allowing members to create quick events on their own, and you can even require approval, all of that is in your event defaults. So I can allow members to create a quick event. I even require approval. Next up, if you have someone who needs to be notified whenever a new event is added to your calendar, maybe you have 4 or 5 people adding events on a regular basis, but you just want them all to maybe go to one person. Maybe that person puts them in a newsletter. Maybe they're going in and sharing those events to your Facebook page. You can add in a number of people. There is a character limit, so you can see the maximum number of characters is 255, but you can continue to add additional email addresses of people who should get notified when an event is created. And then just be sure that if you want them to see that the event has been created as soon as it's added, go ahead and select when the event is created. So as I was preparing for today's webinar, I had this checked off and I ended up sending myself a bunch of event creation emails. So what I did was I actually turned this off. And what this does when I say that I want those emails on demand is it gives the event creator control over when this person is notified. So it allows me as the event creator to say, I don't want them to know about it until I say, notify them that the event has been created. And we'll talk about how to view that in just a moment. Here's our contact person. Now, we talked about at the very, very top of our webinar, our event coordinator. Now, we know the term coordinator. It gives that particular person access to the full module. It's just a step down from being an administrator. But an event contact is an even more specific type of access to events. So an event contact might have administrative rights over a specific event, or in this case, the default event contact would be added as the default contact for every single event that you create. That means that while they don't have coordinator rights over the module, they would have the ability to view the back end of every event that's been created. So if we take a step back and we think about, well, what's the difference? An event contact wouldn't have the ability to add a new event because they don't have access to the events manager. They'd have access to the events that they are the contact for. Now, an event coordinator, on the other hand, is pretty much just like an administrator, except just for events. Now, even within event contacts, you don't have to keep that person as the default. I can remove them from specific events if I need to. Next up, we have some default registration information. So most of this, again, is going to reflect what's listed in the registration section of creating an event. Do you typically always require registration? Great. Let's just make that click now, and that'll save you time in the future. All of these, again, are things, if most of the time you are showing your event capacity, you can just keep this checked. They may seem like very, very small changes, but you'll save yourself the time of having to scan through the fields to find the ones that you want to change every time. And then finally, we have some additional information that's really useful when we're talking about multi-activity events, your default tax rate for those, your default tax rate for items when you're selling items at your multiple activity events. And if you use sequence numbers for your registration, so if perhaps you run a raffle for most of your events and you'd like to issue sequence numbers, or maybe they're for tickets, you can go ahead and track those for every event. We have our non-member settings. We have non-members and guests and what information we're requiring from them. So remember that anyone who is not in your member database who's signing up for an event is going to be added to your non-member database. So a non-member is someone who just shows up and registers on their own. A guest is a non-member that's being added to a member's registration. And all of this information, again, goes in your non-member database. So you have the ability to contact those folks in the future. And last, again, this section does not apply to you if your organization does not have chapters. And we're going to talk a little bit more about chaptered organizations. But when we're talking about chapters, we also have the ability to denote right on our calendar any events that are not club level events, ones that are chapter level or even region level. They can all have a specific letter that denotes what level that particular event is, and then their own specific color. Now, I'm going to cancel out of this. And we've talked a lot about the defaults that we can set up and what those might mean. I want to take a break from that, and I want to kind of talk about where those defaults might come into play. And that'll take us to looking at an event itself and kind of talking about some of the things that we can do here. Now, we've already searched through our calendar. We're displaying all of our events here. I can go ahead and select any event, and we'll take a look at our, our executive board meeting here. We'll select the edit icon. And the edit icon, of course, is going to take us to the back end of the event that we've already created. At the very top, I have my full list of administrator buttons. I can view all of my registrations and track attendance. I also can run reports and exports. Within my reports, all of these reports are going to be event specific. And you'd be surprised as to the number of items within each report. Most of them are going to have, event registrations with answers or events with answers by question. We also have name tags. There are a lot of reports that you can run for each individual event in addition to the exports. So chances are, is if you're looking for the information, it's located in one of our reports. Now, if you are looking at events of yours and you're seeing maybe not all of these icons, right? Maybe you're only seeing registrations and you're not seeing attendance. In order to be able to track attendance, you actually have to tell the system that you want to track attendance. We can view registrations for any event if we are, asking folks to register. If you're not requiring registration, you're not going to be able to view any registration details. But in order to get that tracking attendance, and again, next week, we're going to be talking more about how to actually track attendance and view registrations. If I go into registration and fees, and I'm just sort of taking a look at the basics that I've configured, when you select each tab, you get sort of a preview of what you've configured within that particular section. So if I select registration and fees, I can see right at the bottom here, I have opted to track attendance. And if I want to go in and edit that, let's say I don't see that I'm tracking attendance for that particular event, I can very quickly make that adjustment. If I just select that edit icon, again, that's going to allow me to edit the registration and fees page. I go ahead and scroll down. Here's my attendance section, and I can change that to no, or if I forgot to check that off in the beginning, I can go ahead and track attendance. So if you're looking to maybe take a look at some of your options when you're tracking attendance next week, make sure that the first thing that you do is that you double check that the event that you actually want to track attendance for is set up to do so. So some additional things, and we'll go right back into our board meeting here. We have the ability to We'll go ahead and select emailings. We have the ability to send blast emails through the event calendar. Now, we talked about this very briefly when we spoke about our emailing module in a couple of webinars ago. When you're emailing with regards to events, you have access to all of the same tools that blast emailing affords you, in addition to some extra distribution lists that are specific to the event. So you can email everyone who signed up but hasn't paid, everyone who signed up for a specific activity. There are a lot of additional features that are available within event emailing. So keep in mind that that's an option for you. And also that whenever you create a blast email within an event, that blast email stays in the event. You won't find it in your emailings module. At the very end here, you see a very similar icon, send emails. This is that button that I was telling you about earlier. If I wanted to notify an additional person that I've created this event on my own time frame. Now, I've already created the event, but maybe I wasn't quite ready to share it just yet. I want to wait until I have maybe my formatted description. I want to wait until I have everything ready to go. Then I can go ahead and send that email. I can add in notes for the event. Each of the notes get added. So I can just say that, perhaps I called the library and they're booked. Maybe we're looking for a new venue for our executive board meeting. Maybe we want to have it in person and we're tired of doing it on Zoom. So I'll go ahead and save that. Now I have my notes saved. If I go back into my notes, I can still see the additional note. I can add a new note. And here's my new note that I'm adding, and all of those notes are time-stamped. Now, this is a relatively new feature, so I'll go ahead and save that. It's a relatively new feature. We wanted to give you the opportunity to keep track of many people being involved with your events. We know that there could be, anywhere from 3 to 5 different people working on any given event at one time. So now you have the ability to track everything on the back end, maybe instead of constantly sending emails or texts back and forth between your board members. Now, let's talk about getting rid of events and the 3 different ways that you can get rid of an event. The first that we see right here is to cancel the event. Now, canceling the event really is to notify registrants and website visitors that the event isn't happening. If I select cancel event, I cannot undo this. So I'm going to go ahead and double check, read the message. Whenever you see a pop-up, whether it's this particular pop-up or a pop-up that appears at the very top of your screen, don't ignore those. There's a reason that we've baked those into the code. So always just triple check. Is this the event that I want to delete? I have a lot of board meetings on the calendar. Is it the one that's on the 13th that I'm supposed to cancel? I'll go ahead and confirm this and double confirm. So there really is a low chance of you making a mistake and canceling an event that you don't mean to cancel, but we all get a little bit frazzled and fried sometimes, and it's very easy to just quickly click through boxes because you want to get a task done and move on to another task. So just make sure that you sort of, take a couple moments, breathe, make sure that you're canceling the right event. Now you'll see here that nothing really happened, but I got a giant canceled at the very end of my event. Now, if I want to go ahead and view the event calendar, and I'm taking a look at my events here, and I see that I have my safety committee meetings. I have a bunch of other meetings here. Now, if I go back into the back end here, and I take a look at my next event here, I'll go ahead and check canceled events. I'll go ahead and search. Here's my canceled event. Remember that canceled events are not going to be listed in the events by default. Now, with this particular event, I didn't have any registrants. I can see here I didn't have any registrants. And I know that I didn't have registrants for that particular board meeting because I still have the option to delete it. Once you have a registrant, for example, our general all-member meeting, we have one registrant, you're no longer able to delete that event. Your only option is to archive it. We're going to get to that in a second. But let's talk about our canceled event here. Now that we've canceled the event, it can appear on our calendar as a canceled event, or we can just delete it entirely or archive it if we had the option. When you cancel an event, it will notify anyone who's registered that the event has been canceled, so they can remove it from their calendar. They can make other plans. Now, when I'm deleting an event, I'll go ahead and delete my canceled event. You still do have the option to archive the event if perhaps you don't want to delete it. You actually just want to stow it away. Deleting an event is a permanent action. You can't get that event back. I can go ahead and save that. And like I said, any event that has registrants associated with it, you're not going to be able to delete that event. You can only archive the event. Archived events can actually be unarchived. So let's go ahead and under our event status, I'm going to check all and then uncheck them to just quickly uncheck everything. And I'll go ahead and select archived and search for my event. Now I'm seeing here that I have an archived event and my checkbox is a little bit different here, or excuse me, my box is a little bit different here. Instead of having the option to archive it, I can actually unarchive the event. So unarchiving an event is a really great way to just sort of put things on the back burner, maybe stow them in the closet that no one ever talks about. And you can bring that back if you need to pop it back on your calendar. You can still view the event to maybe see how you worded the description of a certain dinner that you're hosting or a certain 3-day weekend that you're planning with your ski club. Now, if we go ahead and reset our search here, we'll go ahead and click search one more time. So we've talked about all of the different minute things that you can do within events. We've talked about event categories and questions and how those can be used sort of beyond just what's in the event itself, remembering that categories can be tied to attachments. Questions can be tied to other questions that you may have asked folks throughout the process on their website. And then, of course, within event defaults, you're using those time savers to, not just save yourselves time, but also simplify the process of adding events. And we also have talked a little bit about subgroups. So one of the things that I want to sort of take a break and visit would be talking a little bit more about subgroups here. So let me just go ahead and switch gears here. And now we want to touch back on subgroups. Now, we talked about emails for subgroups. So we're going to try and sprinkle some of these into our webinars when they apply, how some of these features are different for folks, either Model 1 organizations or Model 2 organizations, and how that affects you and what you have to do differently to sort of apply some of these changes to your site. Now, on Model 1 organizations, where you have one website, and all of your local chapters are included in that one website. Very, very similar to the Northwest Balloon Club. When you and as administrator sign in, you can see all of your chapters. Members sign in at the parent level, and they can still register for local events if they'd like to. Model 2 organizations are where you have one website per chapter, and members sign in to their local chapter website, which is separate from the parent level, but they can still sign into the parent level to register for events that are happening on a global scale. So when you determine which organization type you are, we have a couple of different tips. So for Model 1 organization, you saw that when we were setting up our coordinators at the very top of our webinar, that we had the option to set them up for a specific region, district, or chapter. You, of course, have the option to set up full website administrators at the region, district, or chapter level, and then coordinators as well. Now, subgroup administrators can only set up events for their subgroup. So if you apply the Chicago chapter to someone's rights, they'll only be able to set up events for the Chicago chapter. And subgroup administrators can limit the attendance to their subgroup. Now, when you as an administrator create an event at the parent level of an organization like this, you can actually limit attendance to a specific subgroup. So if you don't want to assign out those rights, but you still want the ability to add in subgroup specific events to your calendar, you can limit the attendance. Now, with Model 2 organizations, that's going to work slightly differently. Let's talk about this, and then I'll show you what that might look like. Now, with Model 2 organizations, remember that while there is some connection for each of those sites on the back end, on the front end, there's totally separate websites. So what subgroup administrators can do is they can create events on their own calendar because, of course, they are administrators, but they can opt to share those events to their parent level calendar. So let's say that you are a local organization and you're hosting a virtual, maybe a virtual meet and greet with another community organization or perhaps a politician. And you want, people to be able to see that on a wider scale. Maybe you don't want it to be open to just your chapter, but you want it to be open to your state or your local geographic area. You can share that to the parent level calendar. And since you have the ability to sign into both sites, you can get registrants from anywhere in the world. Top level administrators can also push events down to lower level calendars. So it works both ways. And subgroup administrators can still limit their registration to just folks that are in their organization. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that's going to look like from the perspective. We're talking now about Model 2 organizations. We were looking at Model 1 when we were looking at the Northwest Balloon Club. And again, if you don't have chapters within your organization, hang tight because we have one more thing for you at the end of this webinar. So let's again focus on Model 2 organizations. We are currently looking at a different demo site, the Chicago Association of Financial Planners. When I sign into this site, we'll go ahead and very briefly jump to our control panel. And we're really just going to point out how you would share those events, because really the process for creating events is going to be the same. Not just the process, but how you manage those events. All of that is going to be the same. Everything that I said in today's webinar applies. This is just an extra thing to keep in mind when you're adding an event as a local chapter administrator, and you want to share that to a parent organization. So right under your basic info, you'll see the last checkbox, and many of you might actually skip over this section mentally because you don't have an event that repeats on multiple days and you don't need all of this. But at the very end, you have the option to show the event on the top level calendar. What that does is it places a link on the top level calendar that takes users directly back to the Chicago Association of Financial Planners. So they go back to your website to sign in and register. Now, if they're not a member of the Chicago Association and they're a member of, let's say, the Bloomingdale Association, they won't be able to sign in because they're not a member of your chapter. So if your event is only open to members, they won't be able to register. So make sure that the registration that you're hoping for matches who you're pushing out the event to. And then similarly, and this is the final demo site that we'll take a look at today. We're taking quite the tour of the ClubExpress demo sites. If I go ahead and sign in here, and I'm going ahead and I'm creating my event. Now, within my event calendar, I can see that I have a couple of different events here. This continuing education committee meeting looks interesting. So I'm currently on my association, my Illinois Association site. This is the top level site. This is an event that I added from the Chicago Association of Financial Planners. And it actually doesn't open up anything within the Illinois Association. It just opens it up within the Chicago Association. So it brings me right to the event. I can take a look at all of this information. I can register myself if I'd like to. And then, of course, if I take a look at my event calendar, and again, I'm in the events manager for the back end of a parent Model 2 site. So this is actually our statewide site. If I add an event in a very similar spot, I have the option to show the event on all chapter calendars. So this pushes the event out to every single calendar that is beneath the parent level. So all of those features, again, those are things that you want to keep in mind when you are setting up your sites and thinking about how you as a chapter are working with higher tiered organizations, and maybe how you at the parent level are working with your chapters. If you want to add additional events to your calendar, use that feature to share events back and forth to really boost your calendar and, help garner more attendance for events that might be virtual anyways. Now, the last thing that we will talk about today would be something that doesn't necessarily get a ton of attention, and it's custom calendars. Now, custom calendar links, we won't go through actually creating a calendar link. We do have a video tutorial that goes through that. And we also have instructions within our help system. So if you go to help.clubexpress.com and you search for custom calendars, you will see in the search results our creating custom calendars article, and that'll show you how to set up a custom link. Now, what do we mean when we talk about calendar and event links versus a custom calendar link? When you're creating an email, let's say, or you're creating a link to something on a custom page, you are typically choosing from an event category and then a specific event in that category, or choosing a specific future event. In this case, a custom calendar link isn't a link to a specific event. It's not even a link to your calendar per se. It's a link to your calendar with pre-filled search options. So let's say that you want to create a page for your committees. You want to highlight what each committee does. And this is a custom page. Maybe it's specific to a specific committee. Maybe it's your event planning committee. You can create a specific link to your calendar that says, okay, search for my calendar entries that are just from a specific category, just from a specific subgroup, and we can create those custom field calendars. So you would use those a lot for subgroups. So if you are a subgroup administrator and you want to be able to highlight quickly each subgroup's events, and instead of having your members search for their particular subgroup, you can pre-fill the criteria for a link for that particular item. So what I would encourage you to do is play around with the custom calendar information that you can find on our help system and follow the instructions and see where it gets you. So creating a custom calendar is actually fairly simple, and we outline all of the different pieces of information that you might need. We also tell you where to get them. So your category IDs, your metro area IDs, and your subgroup IDs, we show you where to get all of that information, and you can create those custom calendars for your own site. We are right up at time here. Devin, how are we doing on questions?
We are, the chat was very active today. We're doing pretty good. There's a few things we wanted to cover. Something from way back at the beginning. Someone wanted to see again was, can you go over how to add an event coordinator?
I sure can. So I will go ahead and let's go right back into our control panel here. And I'm taking a look at the events, the website tab. I'll select the configure option. And this is for events as a whole. So if I select events and my coordinators tab, and this is true for every module, I can add a coordinator by choosing a member from my database. And if your organization has subgroups, you can also select the specific subgroup that they should have access to, or you can select your top level if they should be a coordinator across the board for all chapters.
All right, and one that I can answer relatively quickly. Someone just had a question about image sizes and if there's a training that goes over different image sizes. There's not always a one size fits all for use exactly this resolution for this fit. The nice thing about ClubExpress is whenever you upload an image, if it's too big, we will usually scale it down. So as long as you're not going like 4K or 8K images that are super huge, because sometimes those can slow your site down, big is fine. If you're looking to update, like a profile picture, something in the ballpark of like 600 to 800 pixels wide is usually what you're looking for. So that's just a quick answer for that. One thing, Sam, you can go over, I think it's roughly the same with full events, but is there anything special that people need to know about deleting a quick event?
Nothing in particular. So if I go ahead and let's just call out our quick events here. So we have quick events and we don't have any registrants for them. So we do have the option to delete them. If I go into an individual quick event, I still have the option on the right-hand side to cancel the events. The icon looks slightly different here. I can edit the quick event, and then on the right-hand side, I can still cancel the quick event. So you still do have the cancellation option, and as long as you have folks to notify, they'll still get notified of the cancellation.
Yes. Okay. We did have a question. Someone brought up like the setting up emergency contacts that people can fill in. This is something we might go over in next week's webinar, but I'll go ahead and give a quick preview of it. So someone had a question about setting up an emergency contact as a field that is automatically populated. And I recommended you do have the option to, when you're setting up event questions, you can reference additional member data questions. So you can obviously call support if you need like a little bit of handholding to get through that. But essentially all you need to do is go to your control panel in the people tab and go to additional member data. And there is a question builder there, and you can build out the question for emergency contact info. And then when you are creating an event question, the very first thing that's going to show up when you're creating event questions is going to be, the first thing that's going to show up is going to be connected to, additional member data questions. So that's where you can connect to membership info or additional member data. And that's where you can link it to that existing emergency contact info. Oh, it looks like I was actually mistaken. You can actually connect to the emergency contact info that's already in the system. So you don't even need to make it as additional member data. There's a correction for me. Learn something new every day.
Of course, make sure that you are collecting emergency contact information as one of your additional fields, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe is in people options.
Yes.
Yes.
I think that's all I had for questions that needed to get brought up for a live demo.
All right. Well, as always, thank you everyone for joining us. We went a little bit over time, but it was well worth it in our opinion. Don't forget to take a look at our webinar that we have scheduled for next week. So again, this webinar is a companion webinar to ours next week. It'll be our last webinar of the year. So of course, if you just are jonesing to hear our voices one more time before we bring in 2023, feel free to stop by. And thank you so much for joining. We'll see you in the next webinar. Bye, everyone.